So, when I was younger, or even when I was older, I had this tendency to be late almost everywhere I went, especially if I went somewhere with my mother. So, if we were going to visit some family, and she told me I had to be there by a certain time, I'd arrive at that time, but I'd still be late. So, for example, if we had to be at dinner, let's say by 7 o'clock, or let's say even by let's say 6:15, um, what she would tell me is we have to be there for 7 o'clock. So then I'd get there, I'd be late. People would ask me what was wrong, why I was late, was it traffic, and I'd say no. My mother said we'd have to be here for 7, and someone would say, well, no, you'd have to be here at 6:15 or at 6:05. And when I asked my mother, she'd say, oh, it's close enough. I just round it up. And if you had to be somewhere for 6:05 or 6:10 or 6:15 or 6:20, I don't think it's quite appropriate to round up your time to 7 o'clock. Doesn't quite make sense. Maybe she should have told me 6 o'clock. Rounding now would have made more sense in that case, and I wouldn't look as bad showing up to those parties late. So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to round numbers properly so you're not late for your parties and so that your numbers actually make sense when you're doing calculations in science and math. But first we're going to do a quick review of what decimals are and whole numbers are, and the convention behind how to identify the position of your decimal so you can round properly. So first we're going to start off by dissecting a whole number and decimal number. So here we have the decimal represented by a period. The right side, on the right side of the decimal, you have the fractional part. On the left side of the decimal, you have the whole number. So a simpler number could be 1.5. This is one whole number, and this is a fractional number. It's half of a whole. So you have the whole number part and the fractional part, and the whole number and the fractional part are separated by a period, which is the decimal. You also need to be familiar with the position of those numbers. So we're going to start on the left side of the decimal. The first number you encounter on the left side of the decimal is in the ones position. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now once you go beyond 9, you start getting into your tens position. So you might have 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 20 is still part of the tens. 30 is still part of the tens. Once you go beyond the tens, then you're in your hundreds. So you go up all the way to 99, and then all of a sudden you're in your hundreds. So you need another place there, and that's called your hundreds position. And that can keep going. You have your thousands position after that, once you go high enough. And then after that you can have your 10,000, so on and so forth. And it keeps going up. Now, on the right side of the decimal, for the fractional number, the first position you encounter is called the tenths. Look at that th there, tenths. Okay, whenever you see that the th there, ths sound, you have numbers on the right side of the decimal. So the tenths, then your hundredths position, then your thousandths position, then your 10,000ths position. Okay, so don't confuse that with the thousands position on the left side. Thousandths is on the right side. So become familiar with those positions, because oftentimes when we tell you to round, we'll tell you to round to the nearest tenth, the nearest hundredth, the nearest thousandth, or we might say round to the nearest ones, or the nearest tens, or hundreds, or thousands. So you need to become familiar with these key words and what the position tells you. So we'll do an example together here. So in the number 2039, 876, 2039.876, what digit is in the tenths place? So THS, we know we're looking on the right side in the fractional portion. And tenths is the first number we encounter to the right side of the decimal. So the number in a tenths place in this case would be 8. In the ones place, So we don't see a THS, so we know we're on the left side of the decimal. And we know the first number to encounter on the left side is the ones, so it would be 9. Try to pause the video and try the rest on your own, and then come back and check if you have the right answer. What digit is in the tens place? So again, no THS, so we know we're on the left side. It's not the first number we encounter, but the second number we encounter. It's our tens position. What digit is in the thousandths place? So now we have a THS. We know we're on the right side of the decimal. This is the tenths. This is the hundredths. This is the thousandths. 6. So you can practice that with the remaining problems here. And it would be a good idea to compare answers with each other to make sure you're on the right track. And let's see if our answers are correct. They were. So I believe we want to go over how to actually say these numbers using words. I won't really ask you to spell them out, but if I do spell them out for you, you should be able to write it out. So basically, the general rule for saying a number is you say the whole number, and then you follow through with the fractional part. You say the fractional part and state what position it's at. So here, I mean, you know how to say just regular whole numbers. You just say it as is, so 58. But now, in this case, I'm going to skip this one here and go to this one here. So first you say your whole number. Your whole number is 100. So you say 100. Then you put and you say the fractional number, 25. And you say the position of the last number in that fractional part. So this is our tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So we have 125. That's where that's from. And since that 5 is in the thousandths position, that last number there, we put thousandths. Okay. Here again, whole number 11 and 3. Now this is the tenths, this is the hundredths here. 300ths. Now here there's a bit of an error in the formatting. There shouldn't be a comma. You don't need that comma there. There should just be a space. So here we have 6,040. That's our whole number. And 9. This is in the tenths position, tenths. Here, since there's no, for the one I skipped, since there's no whole number, you don't say the whole number, you just say what you have. So you have 125, the 5 is in the thousandths position, thousandths. Now you may have noticed a mistake here too. If you watch the formatting video for the SI units, there should be a 0 in the front. Never just put 0.125. Put a 0 there. So on the following slides, you have some practice problems for saying the number that you see using the proper vocabulary and the proper position system. So you can go through those slides and practice saying the numbers that you see. I'll do one example with you, but the answers are all on those slides. So here we have our whole number, 4. We have our decimal, which reads as and, so 4 and. We have our fractional number, which is 18, and it's in, the last number is in the hundredths position, so 4 and 18 hundredths. And you can go and practice the other numbers, the other slides. The answers will come up when you actually try it out, and just press spacebar or continue watching the video on YouTube. Here we have some more practice problems where you simply have to write the numbers out from the words. So previously you were given the number and you had to write the word. Here you're given the word and you have to write the number. So again, take a look at the position. So we'll try one of the examples together. We'll do number 4 first. Maybe I'll do 2 examples. We'll see. So 1 and 4,000. So the first part before the end, remember, represents our decimal. So we have 1 is our whole number, and is our decimal. We have 4 thousandths. So Our 4 is in the thousandth position. So the first position we encounter is our 10th, so there's going to be a 0 there. The second position is our 100th, so there's going to be a 0 there. But the third position, that's our thousandth, so that's where our 4 is going to be. So we have 1 and 4 thousandths. Let's try one more example together. So here we have 162 thousandths. So remember, the and represents the decimal. So to the left of it, we have our whole number, so we have 100. So 1, 0, 0, dot, that's our and, 62 thousandths. So our 62 we know is the number 62. And the th here and thousandths signify that our 2 has to end up in the thousandths position. Now, if you just wrote 100.62, the 2 is not in the thousandths position, it's in the hundredth. So we need to put something in this number to make sure that the 2 ends up in the thousandths position. So what we'll do is we'll put a 0 in our tenths position, a 6 in our hundredths, and the 2 will end up in the thousandths. So we have 162 thousandths. So if you make sure you find that decimal place and your number ends up where it should end up based on the th sound, then you'll be in a better position to write down these numbers appropriately. So you can attempt these practice problems, compare answers, and then you can move on to the rounding rules, which we'll see next. So before we actually do practice problems, there's a neat poem you should try to memorize. There's more to rounding than this poem, and we're going to see some exceptions, but the poem goes as follows. Find your number, circle it, look next door, 4 or less, just ignore, more than 5, add 1 more. So let's see how that poem applies. So we have this number here, 4,129. We want to round it to the nearest hundreds. So what you need to do is you need to find a hundreds position. Remember that the first number here, even though there's no decimal point, there would be on the right side here, is our ones, this is our tens, and this is our hundreds. So circle the number, find the number, that's what you're doing, we're circling it, that you want to round to the nearest. So we have the hundreds there. Now we're going to look next door to it. We're going to look to the right of it, this number here. You'll notice that it says if it's 4 or less, you can just ignore. If it's more than 5, add 1 more. So because we have less than 4, we're going to round down in this case. So what we're going to do is we're going to round down to 4,100. Because this 2 next to our hundreds is less than 4, we're not going to add 1 to our hundreds because it's not more than 5. So we're able to round down here. 4,129 is closer to 4,100 than it would be if you said 4,200. If you were trying to round a price, 4,100 is closer to that price than 4,200. So now we're going to try another sample problem together. If you go through the PowerPoint and the video, you're going to see that the problem solves itself, but I'm going to write over the animation just to kind of walk you through how the problem works. So here we have to round to the nearest 10,000. So here's our 1, here's our tens, here's our hundreds, Here's our thousands. Here's our 10,000s. So we'll circle that number. Let's look next door. That's more than 5. So what that means is we have to add 1 to our 10,000 position. So this will become 7 here, and the rest becomes 0. 0, 0, 0, 0. Notice how I tried to have some space over here because we grouped them in terms of 3, so we have 370,000. So let's try this one here where we're rounding the fractional part. So round to the nearest hundredths. So let's find our hundredths. So this is our tenths, this is our hundredths. Okay, let's circle that. Look next door. That's more than 5. So this is going to round to 35.33. So we're adding 1 here. Notice that because we're rounding to the nearest hundredths, make sure that your final rounded answer actually ends at the hundredths. Don't write 35.330 because now this is in the thousandths again. Don't do that. Just drop that. And it's 35.33. So if you're just doing the whole number, you can't not put a number where the other numbers were. But here you can do that when you're doing the fractional numbers. So here we have to round to the nearest tenths place. So again, find your tenths, that's here. We look next door, 7, that's more than 5. So what that means is we can add a +1 here. And since you want us to get a tenths, you can drop all these numbers, add +1 there, and you get 4.9. In this example, we have to round to the nearest hundredths. So here's our tenths, this is our hundredths over here. Look next door, that's less than 4. So we don't add a +1 this time, we can just cross that 1 out, and we have 62.42. So here we have some other practice problems for you to do. Hopefully throughout the PowerPoint you were following along with the Word document and doing the sample problems in the table as we were doing them together. And if there were some you didn't get, go back and retry them. So try these practice problems here. If you go through the video animation, they'll be completed for you. And if you go through the PowerPoint as well and just kind of click the buttons to make the animations go forward, you can also see the answers. So again, there's some more practice problems for you to try here, and you can go through those using the PowerPoint. Now we have a few exceptions to go over. Sometimes you might have a case where your rounding includes a 5. So when your rounding includes a 5 as the digit that's next door, and there's no other digits that follow that, or there's a 0, let's just say, so 7.75, no other digit after 5, or was it 50? Here's a rule you would use. You would round to keep it to the nearest even number. Round to keep it to the nearest even number, or to bring it to the next even number. So 7.75, if you want to round it to the nearest 10th, find your 10th here. Look next door, it's a 5, because 5 is always tricky. Some people say round up, some people say don't round. You're going to follow this rule for this course. You want to bring it up to the even number, 7.8. Okay, but let's say you have 7.85. Well, it's already an even number here, so you can just round down to 7.8. Okay, so if you have a 5 with the 0 that follows or no other numbers that follow, then what you're going to do is you're going to bring the number before it to the even position. Now, let's say that rounding includes a number, includes a 5, and a non-zero digit that follows it. Then there's a bit of a different rule. So here, for example, we have 6.6501. So if we had 6.65 and we had to round to the nearest 10th, well, we look at our 10th, circle it, look next door, it's 5, and we want to keep it even, 6.6. Well, in this case, we do have 6.65, but there's a non-zero digit that follows it. There's 0, 1 here. So in that case, what we do is we increase the number by 1. So 6.65 becomes 6.67. Because it's actually a little bit more than a 5 that follows it. It's a 501 that follows it. So we need to round up in that case. So let's take a look at this situation here. We want to round to 2dp. 2dp means 2 decimal places. So instead of saying the nearest, let's say 100th, we said 2dp, because 100th, when you think about it, here's 10th, here's 100th, that's 2 decimal places there. Okay. Now before that, so here we have 8, here we have a 5. Now normally, if it was 7.485 and you had to round the 2 decimal places, you would circle the 8, look next door, and you would keep it even. So you would say 7.48. But in this case, we have 5, yes, but we have non-zero digits that follow that 5. So because we have non-zero digits that follow that 5, when I say non-zero, it means anything above 0, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Non-zero digits follow 5, we actually have to round up instead. So we're going to round this 7.48 to 7.49, and then we can get rid of all the other digits. So that's the main exception when you have that 5 next door. Take a look to see if you have an even number, an odd number, and take a look if anything follows that 5. And if something does and it's non-zero, then you have to make sure that you round up as opposed to follow the even rule. It can be a bit tricky at first, but once you practice, then you'll get the hang of it. So another tricky situation is rounding a 9. So let's say, for example, that I had to round 2.197 to the closest hundredths. In this case here, the closest hundredth, we have the 10th, we have the 100th. Now let's look next door. We have a 7. That's higher than 5. So we know that we need to add +1 to our 9. When you add +1 to our 9, well, that makes it a 10, and you have no room to put just a 10 in one spot. So what you really have to do is now add that +1 to the neighbor to its left. So this would become 2.2, and then make sure you put that 0 there to show that you rounded to the closest hundredth. If you just put 2.2, then that looks like you rounded to the nearest 10th. So read that decimal position carefully. So in a way, it's kind of like you're treating this 0.19 as a single unit. It's like you're rounding the 0.19 up instead of just that one digit, um, instead of just the one digit itself. So if you have a situation with 9 and it goes up, add the +1 to the number to the left of the 9, and make sure you put the 0 in the proper position so that you actually end up in the hundredths and not the tenths. So you can try this sample problem here. Round 4.95 to the closest tenth. So here we have our 10th position. Look next door. It's a 5. Now here's the problem. We will round up, but it's a 9. You can't really put a 10 in the single digit, so now we have to add the 1 to the digit to its left. So this becomes 5.0. We're rounding up because I know there's a 5 here, but it's not an even number. 9 is not even, so we want to make it even. So 5.0. And I'm putting a 0 there because we're rounding to the closest tenth. If I left it as a 5, that means we rounded to the closest ones. Here are some other sample problems you can try. If you go through the video and you continue watching, the answers will appear as you go. You can pause it at this point and try it out yourself first, then compare. And if there's something you did incorrectly, put a star next to it and try it again. If you're going through the PowerPoint, then all you have to do is kind of turn on the animation and press the spacebar or whatever button that you advance in order to see the answers appear. You have a few more practice problems to try over here. Make sure you attempt them and compare answers with your peers to see that you're on the right track. Pay attention to the vocabulary, the thousandths position, hundredths position. Go back and review those positions if you're not sure what it means. The tenths position. Take a look at the the exceptions with the 5s and the 9s, and there will be a answer key posted online later on for you to take a look at to make sure that you're on the right track with these rounding rules. A lot of students ask, well, how do we know when to round to 2 digits, to the hundredths, or to the tenths when we're doing multiplication or addition or different calculations? There are actually rules for that we may see later on, called significant figures or significant digits, and we'll take a look at that later on. But just make sure you pay attention to the rules and to the guidelines that your teacher in your class tells you. Okay, so it all depends on what your teacher in your class tells you. Again, here are some more practice problems. Sometimes you might be asked to round to 2 decimal places, or you might be asked in terms of the hundredths position or thousandths position, so just pay attention to those rules there. Again, if you say 1 decimal place, well, this is 1 decimal place here. If you say 2 decimal places, this is 2 decimal places. If you had said 3, well, this would be 3 decimal places over here. So just pay attention to those key words to make sure you write the number down properly. More practice problems for you to attempt. So for homework, make sure you complete all the practice problems. Make sure you have watched this video if you're here. Hopefully you've watched it. There's another video you can watch here if you need help with rounding, and just make sure you review the PowerPoint a little bit until you're really comfortable with all these rounding rules. You'll start off slow, but eventually as you practice, it'll become a lot easier to do and you'll be a rounding pro.